English translation 136th Contact Part 4. Tuesday, 14th of October 1980, 2341 HRs.
Mullah protest from a wheelchair.
Tears and threats against the USA yesterday in the Iranian parliament. Several MPs injured in Sunday's attack had been brought into the assembly hall in wheelchairs. "Death to Satan, America!" shouted the parliamentarians as they commemorated the 74 victims. At the same time, a large number of human beings were again executed in Tehran, and the underground organization Front for National Equality again called for resistance.
Blick, Zurich, Thursday, 2nd July, 1981.
Iran, revolutionary tribunals legalized.
Tehran, 8th of July. SDA-AFP, Iran's fundamentalist-dominated parliament, legalized the revolutionary tribunals on Wednesday. The text, adopted by 128 votes to 52, thus gives the revolutionary tribunals a legal statute that was not provided for in the Iranian constitution. In particular, Article 4 of the new law gives the revolutionary judges a completely free hand to pass judgment in accordance with the principles of Islam. The perpetrators of such diverse offenses as provocation and incitement of the people with a political aim, formation of corrupt gangs, or simply acts against God can now be sentenced. The formula of crime against God, already commonly used in sentences, seems vague enough to allow the conviction of any person classified as an opponent of the regime. The only way out for the accused seems to be repentance. According to the prosecutor of the Tehran Revolutionary Tribunal, Lajavardi, anyone who declares himself to be a Paykari Marxist-Leninist will be sentenced to death and executed. Only sincere repentance can save, as the Tehran newspaper Kayhan reported on Wednesday. 5 followers of the People's Mujahideen in the eastern Iranian province of Khorasan came to the mosque to express their remorse and condemn the criminal acts, and the believers welcomed them with open arms, Kayhan noted.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Thursday, 9th July, 1980.
Russian atomic bomb tests to blame for Iran earthquake.
Tehran, Bochum. Underground nuclear bomb tests by the Soviet Union are said to be to blame for the severe earthquake in Iran that claimed between 3,000 and 5,000 lives on Thursday. This is claimed by Professor Heinz Kaminsky of the Bochum Institute for Space Research. In the western Urals and in Semipalatinsk, the Soviets had carried out such experiments at the end of May. Kaminsky. From there, a fault zone in the Earth's crust runs southwest and is tangential to Iran. Earthquakes occur near and in the far field of such experiments.
Blick, Zurich, Friday, 31st July, 1981.
In 2 weeks, 140 human beings executed.
London, 7th July. AP, DDP, Reuters, AFP. The Iranian authorities have ordered the closure of the Tehran office of the British news agency Reuters indefinitely, and ordered the agency's 3 journalists working in Iran to leave the country within 48 hours. The wave of executions in Iran also continued on Tuesday in various cities. 9 human beings lost their lives. The official news agency Pars reported that the executed were leaders of the leftist Mujahideen and a trade unionist. All were charged with offenses against the Islamic Republic. This brings to about 140 the number of human beings executed in Iran since the strict crackdown by the revolutionary authorities on political opponents a little over a fortnight ago. Since Monday, 36 executions of enemies of the Islamic Revolution have been officially announced. The revolutionary authorities reported the arrest of over 40 People's Mujahideen on Tuesday. Among them is Khalil Hajbachi, the former head of the liaison office between the people and the president. He is accused of trying to stir up trouble and kill innocent human beings in support of deposed President Bani Sadr. A larger explosive device was discovered and defused in a mosque in Tehran. According to official sources, the bomb was supposed to explode when the lights were turned off. A note was found with the bomb, signed by a workers' association, with the following text: "The first was a tragedy, the next will be a disaster." Radio Tehran had announced the closure of the Reuters agency office, saying that the British press office had been a center for conspiracy against the Islamic Revolution. During the past month alone, the Tehran Reuters office had spread tendentious and untrue reports and ignored official warnings in more than 10 cases, the station reported. According to the Reuters spokesperson, the Iranian Ministry of Islamic Guidance has informed the 3 Tehran correspondents, Bureau Chief Barry May, and reporters Alan Phillips and Phil Davison, that a review of Reuters reports from Tehran conducted by the official Iranian news agency Pars found the coverage to be doctored. Most Western news agencies, Associated Press AP and United Press International UPI, have been forced to suspend their operations in Iran under similar accusations. Iran does not want to follow either the East or the West in its foreign policy, but, in the words of its new foreign minister Hussein Mousawi, go its own way independent of the superpowers. Mousawi announced changes in Iran's foreign policy, as the goals of the Islamic Revolution prioritize the concerns of Islamic and Middle Eastern countries and the oppressed peoples. The size of Iranian embassies would be staffed according to the importance of each country. The closure of diplomatic missions would mainly affect Western countries. Iran will only maintain as many staff there as is necessary to deal with the concerns of students and other important issues.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Wednesday, 8th July 1918.
It cannot be otherwise with one such who has gotten very badly out of control of the good human nature.
Unfortunately, that is correct. But continue to listen. I already told you about the severe quake in China, which can be expected, in particular, in the area around Sichuan. After the events that you mentioned earlier, this Chinese seismic zone will suffer from severe floods, resulting in deaths that will amount to about 4,700.
China, flooding continues.
Peking 19th July. AP, devastating floods in parts of China, which have killed 3,000 to 4,000 human beings and left hundreds of thousands homeless in recent days, TA on Saturday, also continued on Sunday. In China, where the flood disaster in Sichuan province was particularly severe, the authorities said on Saturday that up to 4,000 people had died and 50,000 to 100,000 were injured. The flood waves of the Yangtze River, which carried a record 72,000 cubic meters of water per second, passed the construction site of the Gezhuba Dam in Hubei province on Sunday, without causing much damage to this, China's largest dam construction site. After passing the construction site, the water masses reached the city of Shashi in Hubei province on Sunday afternoon. This area had already been devastated by floods last year. The government deployed 200,000 soldiers and civilians to protect the dikes along a nearly 200-kilometer stretch of the river. 500,000 human beings were left homeless, it said. More heavy rains were expected in Sichuan early this week. However, the authorities assured that no new, too severe damage was expected. People have been told to move their belongings to higher ground. Factories had also taken precautionary measures.
Many dead also in India.
Delhi, 19th July. AP heavy monsoon downpours continued over the weekend in the northwestern Indian sub-state of Rajasthan, which has been hit by catastrophic floods. On Saturday, 45 occupants of a bus washed away by raging floodwaters near the capital, Jaipur, drowned. In Jaipur alone, more than 1,000 houses collapsed. In the city of Bikaner, 400 kilometers southwest of Delhi, 600 buildings were damaged.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Monday, 20th of July, 1980.
It will also be the time during which the murderous and criminal Israeli president of the state, Menachem Begin, will again be confirmed into his office, according to which he will immediately command and carry out new murderous attacks on the neighboring countries.
Israel elections, Geneva millionaire to tip the scales. By Tevye S. Newman.
Jerusalem. Jewish Geneva-based multimillionaire Nissim Gaon has it in his hands to decide whether Israel's previous head of government, Menachem Begin 68, will retain power. Although Begin and his conservative Likud bloc missed winning Tuesday's parliamentary elections by one seat, he could form a new coalition government with the help of the Genevan. For the powerful Nissim Gaon is a financier and thus head of the Tommy Party, which has won 3 parliamentary seats. And with these 3 seats of the North African and Mediterranean Jews, Begin would have an absolute majority in the 120-member parliament, the Knesset. Precondition: Begin must also unite the moderate national religious and the Orthodox Jews behind him. The calculation works. These 2 parties together have 11 seats, Begin 48, and the Tommy people of Nissim Gaon 3 seats. Gaon sent his closest advisor to Israel by special plane immediately after the election results were known. Negotiations are underway, and Begin declared confidently yesterday, "There is no question for me. We will form the new government together." Nevertheless, President Yitzhak Navo is expected to give opposition leader Shimon Peres, 58, who won the elections with his Labor Party, a chance first. But Peres, with his 49 seats, has no prospects of rallying a viable majority around him. The election winner risks being left behind as a loser.
Blick, Zurich, Thursday, 2nd July, 1981.
Begin will stop at nothing.
Jerusalem. In his fight for re-election as Israeli Prime Minister, Menachem Begin will stop at nothing. Now he has revealed to the public a top-secret letter from opposition leader Shimon Peres. In the letter, the Labor Party leader had asked him not to carry out the bombing of the Iraqi nuclear facility at Tammuz. Begin promptly distributed the letter to the members of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Policy Committee of the Parliament. From there, it also reached the press. In the meantime, U.S. President Reagan has punished Begin for his commando action in Iraq. The USA does not want to deliver any more fighter planes to Israel until further notice.
Blick, Zurich, Friday, 12th of June, 1981.
Likud leader wants to form a 4-party coalition Israel. Begin now officially election winner.
Jerusalem, 9th July. Reuters AP, the Likud bloc of incumbent Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, has emerged victorious in the June 30th parliamentary elections with a 1-seat lead over the Labor Party. According to the final results published in Jerusalem on Thursday, the Likud bloc won 48 seats in the 120-seat Knesset parliament, while the Labor Party won 47. The Likud bloc received 10,405 votes more than the Labor Party. The turnout was 78%. Menachem Begin had already declared on Wednesday that he had the necessary absolute majority of 61 MPs to form a government. Begin wants to form a coalition with 13 MPs from 3 religious parties, the National Religious Party NRP, the Tommy Party, and the Aguda Israel. Begin said he does not rule out a coalition with Moshe Dayan's Telem Group 2 seats or the right-wing Tehiyah Party 3 seats. Reports about a possible appointment of Conservative Agriculture Minister Ariel Sharon as the new defense minister were neither confirmed nor denied by Begin in the TV program. He explained that he had refrained from appointing Sharon as defense minister in the last government because of the expected opposition in the cabinet. Sharon is one of the advocates of Israel's settlement policy in the occupied territories. Begin announced the continuation of the settlement policy. We will add houses and human beings. Our main concern is to get more Jews to live in Judea and Samaria West Bank, the Prime Minister said. Government sources said that despite consistent conversations among the parties, President Yitzhak Navon would not formally task Begin with forming a government until early next week at the earliest. The final voting result was as follows.
Tagesanzeiger. Zürich, Friday, 10th July 1980.
This time, bomb attacks on the Lebanese capital will be part of the plan, which will cause hundreds of deaths to be lamented over as a result of several attacks by the Israeli Air Force.
Israeli airstrike on southern Lebanon.
Beirut, 10th July. AP, Israeli warplanes attacked Palestinian positions in southern Lebanon with bombs and rockets on Friday. This is according to PLO communique released by the Israeli military command in Tel Aviv and in Beirut. The target of the operation was the area around Habush, Wadi al-Akhdar and Aktanet. Lebanese radio reported in the evening that 3 people were killed and 20 wounded in the attacks.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Saturday, 11th July 1980.
Israelis shoot down Syrian MiG.
Beirut, 14th of July. AFP, at least 19 human beings were killed and 28 others injured in Israeli airstrikes on Tuesday. This was according to a preliminary count by press correspondents at hospitals in the city of Saida. The Israeli airstrikes lasted for about 2 hours and ended at 18H Cest. In the course of the attacks, there was a dogfight with Syrian aircraft, during which one of the Syrian MiG-23s was shot down.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Wednesday, 15th July 1980.
Israeli bombs, 120 dead.
Beirut, Israeli warplanes bombed the Lebanese capital Beirut several times yesterday, firing missiles at it. Over 120 human beings were killed and more than 500 injured, some seriously. Many of the victims of this first Israeli attack on Beirut in 3 years are civilians. An eyewitness: entire apartment blocks collapsed like houses of cards. Thousands of residents fled the city. The Defense Ministry in Jerusalem said the target of this retaliatory strike was Palestinian terrorists. Palestinians had shelled Israeli border towns on Thursday, killing 3 civilians. The Israeli High Command said the attacks had destroyed the headquarters of al-Fatah and PLO terrorists. A PLO spokesman, on the other hand, described this information as exaggerated. In the meantime, the Lebanese government has called for a special session of the UN Security Council.
Blick Zürich, Saturday, 18th July 1981.
New Israeli strike against southern Lebanon.
Beirut, Tel Aviv, 23rd July. AP, despite growing criticism of its actions, Israel on Thursday again used its air force to strike targets in southern Lebanon. According to the Israeli High Command, fighter jets attacked gun emplacements of Palestinian free fighters in southeastern Lebanon near Hasbajah at the foot of the Hermon Massif. All Israeli aircraft returned safely from the enemy flight. The pilots reported scoring direct hits. The Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) announced that the Israeli aircraft had destroyed a strategically important bridge. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, 6 towns between the port of Tyre and Hasbadja in the Bekaa Valley came under resolution on Thursday afternoon. Of the 30 deaths counted in southern Lebanon on Wednesday, 20 alone were killed when Israeli warplanes bombed 2 auxiliary footbridges over the Litani River, 8 kilometers north of Tyre. The victims were on the footbridges at the time of the attacks.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Friday, 24th July, 1980.
This will be a result of the greed-driven madness of Begin, and will be further proof that the people of Begin all around the earth can practically allow themselves to do anything under the protection of his powerful, allied large and small countries, because the leaders of these countries are blind to the true plans of Israel.
Israel bombs PLO headquarters in Beirut.
Beirut, Tel Aviv, 17th July. Reuters, AFP, AP, massive Israeli airstrikes on Palestinian command centers and supply routes in Lebanon killed 123 human beings on Friday, according to a report by the Palestinian news agency Wafa. More than 500 human beings were injured. The targets were in the capital Beirut and in the south of the country. The Israeli High Command in Tel Aviv said the headquarters of al-Fatah and the Popular Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine in the western part of Beirut had been destroyed. The planes had returned safely. Following the Israeli airstrikes, the Palestinians' highest military council, chaired by PLO leader Yasser Arafat, convened for a special session. A spokesman for the council held the U.S. and President Ronald Reagan partly responsible for the Israeli action, which hit civilian targets such as schools, universities, and mosques. The Palestinians would continue their policy of confrontation with Israel, the spokesperson said.
Appeal to Arabs and Security Council.
In a message addressed to Arab kings and heads of state, Arafat on Friday called for increased aid to the Palestinian cause. "I need your sword, not your blessing, to take on the increasing aggressiveness of the enemy." A spokesman for the Lebanese government announced that President Elias Sarkis had instructed his country's UN representation to request a special session of the Security Council because of the Israeli attacks. Sarkis also asked the ambassadors of the United States and the Soviet Union to come and use their influence to put a stop to Israel's actions. Prime Minister Shafik Wassan, meanwhile, summoned the ambassadors of all Arab countries to Beirut and called on them for active and energetic joint assistance to defend themselves against the barbaric attacks. A PLO spokesman described Israeli claims of destruction as exaggerated. He said that al-Fatah's headquarters had not been destroyed, but that 2 residential buildings nearby, which were part of the residential area of Beirut University, had been. Journalists in Beirut reported that the planes flew 6 attacks within 25 minutes, firing missiles at the Chatiya and Sabra camps. At least 5 apartment blocks were destroyed in the Fakahani district. 15 human beings were reported killed in Saida Sidon and in the oil port of Sarani. South of it, when an Israeli patrol boat took fire in the coastal area, destroying the coastal road and setting fire to an oil pipeline. The coastal towns of Damour and Sadijat were bombed by a squadron of 12 Israeli aircraft, according to a PLO communiqué. On Friday afternoon, Israeli warplanes flew new airstrikes, according to the High Command in Tel Aviv. 3 bridges over the Litani and Sarani rivers in southern Lebanon were destroyed. Another mission was directed against a regional PLO command center in Al-Bas near the port city of As-Sur Tyre. All aircraft returned undamaged from the enemy flight. Already on Thursday, the Israeli Air Force had destroyed 5 bridges over the Litani and the Sarani in order to cut off the Palestinian guerrillas from their supply connections. The Israeli High Command said that Palestinian rockets had again hit the northern Israeli border area near Nahariya and other parts of the Galilee on Friday morning. 5 people were injured. Israeli artillery returned fire. In a conversation with Israeli radio, Deputy Defense Minister Mordechai Zipori said, "We decided it became necessary to tackle the head directly, and the head is in Beirut." Zipori added that he hoped the guerrillas understood the message. Otherwise, the Israeli government would have to find other means.
PLO appeals to Red Cross.
Geneva, 17th of July. SDA, the PLO, has appealed to the ICRC in Geneva in the face of barbaric attacks by Israel, which is using a terrible war machine supplied by the USA against Lebanese civilians and Palestinian refugee camps. The permanent observer of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, to the international organizations in Geneva, Daoud Barakat, asked the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC, Alexander Hay, to intervene on Friday so that these criminal acts are put to an end and the severely beleaguered civilian population is given the help it needs. Civilian targets no longer spared Jerusalem, 17th of July. DPA AFP. According to Foreign Minister Shamir, the Israeli army will in future no longer spare even those command centers of the Palestinians, which are located in the middle of civilian areas. In an interview with Radio Jerusalem on Friday, the minister said, "We must take away from the terrorists the immunity they had given themselves by setting up their quarters in civilian surroundings." In the future, however, Israel would also endeavor to spare the Lebanese civilian population. AFP quoted a communique published on Friday by the Office of Acting Prime Minister Begin, according to which Israel would no longer show consideration for civilians in future attacks on Palestinian targets.
But when will these clowns finally wise up and smell a rat?
This will, unfortunately, still take a very long time.
Okay, go on.
Up to and by the end of June 1981, 2 facts will arise in your homeland, Switzerland, which are worth mentioning. In the first half of the year 1981, it will result in Switzerland similarly as with the murder cases, in that the number of drug-related deaths will rise so high in the first 6 months of the year that at the end of June, it will be as high as it was in the entire year of 1980.
More and more drug-related deaths. Why?
Zurich, 21st July. The number of drug-related deaths in the canton of Zurich has already risen to 20 this year. The latest drug victim, the 4th in just over a week, is a 22-year-old cook who was found in the toilet of an apartment building in Zurich's Stadtkreis 1 on Monday afternoon. The accumulation of drug deaths in the last few days could be related to the fact that especially pure heroin is currently being traded on the Zurich market, explained a social worker of the Psychiatric Counseling Center for Youth and Drug Problems Drop-In in an interview with the TA. For the fixers, who are usually used to stretched substance, this drug could have a lethal effect in the otherwise usual dose. The drop-in is of the opinion that the drug situation is alarming. In the last 2 years, a clear increase in drug consumption has been observed. Every week, 20 to 28 so-called initial counseling sessions are conducted at the drop-in, about 1/3 of which are for heroin addicts.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Wednesday, 22nd July 1982.
Already as many drug deaths as in the whole of 1980.
20 drug victims in the first half of 1981 in the canton of Zurich alone. This corresponds exactly to the number of the entire previous year. The situation is therefore alarming. According to the Psychiatric Counseling Center for Youth and Drug Problems Drop-In, drug consumption has increased drastically in the last 2 years. and continues to rise. Social worker Heinz Wissling, who has been working at Drop-In for 4 years, explains the background to the drama.
TA. Is it to be concluded from the significant increase in the number of drug deaths that drug use in general has increased?
Whistling, yes. And this does not surprise us. After all, the drop-in counselling service has been constantly booked up for quite some time.
Interview by Eric Schmid.
TA. How has the number of drop-in counselling sessions developed?
Whistling, we currently conduct between 20 and 28 initial counselling sessions per week. About 1/3 of them are used by heroin addicts who suffer from withdrawal symptoms. In recent years, this number has steadily increased and is constantly rising. A decrease is not foreseeable. Heroin, every shot with risk of death.
TA. According to the responsible authorities, the drug victims so far have always been heroin users. What causes death when this drug is used?
Whistling. Death from heroin injections is rather accidental. A fixer lives in constant danger of injecting an overdose. In fact, he runs a real risk of death with practically every shot. The fact that the number of heroin victims has increased in the last few days and weeks is most likely not related to the general increase in heroin consumption, but rather to the quality of the substance currently available on the black market. This means that there is apparently a lot of good, that is to say pure heroin in circulation, which the fixer, who is used to bad, that is to say cut heroin, can no longer tolerate. Out of sheer habit, the same dose is usually administered, a dose that then has the effect of an overdose, so to speak. If the quality of the heroin were always the same, one could assume that not so many deaths would occur.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Wednesday, 22nd July 1989.
Then, beginning in the middle of July, Switzerland will be inflicted by terrorists who will move the population into fear and fright through a whole number of bomb attacks in different cities and places, whereby, unfortunately, many humans will be injured, quite apart from the millions worth of property damages.
Bomb at the Federal Palace by Rolf Widmer.
Bern. A bomb exploded yesterday afternoon at the Federal Palace. The explosive device went off at 1412 HRs in a rubbish bin that is attached to the wall in the passage to the Federal Terrace between the Parliament Building and the Bundeshaus West. There was a terrible crash in the Federal Palace, said an official. Passers-by ran away from the tin bucket. An explosive charge had gone off and a car parked next to the bucket was endangered by burning paper. Electric wires were still hanging out of the bucket. The bomb had been detonated with an alarm clock. The supervisor immediately alerted the police. One of 2 explosive charges of 500 grams of explosive had detonated in the waste bucket. Another 500-gram explosive device had failed to detonate. It was pure coincidence that no one was injured, because shortly after 14 HRs the passageway is heavily frequented by passers-by. No material damage was caused to the Federal Palace because the explosive force was able to escape upwards from the bucket. Shortly after the explosion, the organization 9th June claimed responsibility for the attack. On the 9th of June 1981, a young Armenian was arrested in Geneva after shooting a member of the Turkish consulate.
Blick Zurich, Monday, 20th June 1981.
Another Armenian bomb. 5 injured in Cloton by our reporter Denise Marquardt.
Cloton, 20th July. For the second time in just over 24 hours, the Armenian organization 9th June has carried out an explosive attack in Switzerland. In any case, an anonymous caller on behalf of the organization claimed to have been the author of the heavy explosion on Monday afternoon in the hall of the airport railway station in Zurich-Kloten. According to initial police investigations, the source of the explosion was next to a photo booth directly below a staircase. 5 persons were slightly injured in the attack. Initial estimates put the property damage at around 300,000 Swiss francs. Suddenly we heard an incredibly loud bang. Almost at the same time, parts of the ceiling fell inside the shop, and all the window panes burst out of their frames, reported an excited flower seller. A fruit seller from Maranello, the shop is very close to the explosion site, was filling up beer bottles when he felt the loud detonation. At first I thought it was an earthquake. Then I saw a jet of flame burst out of the photo booth and a cloud of smoke immediately formed. According to the cantonal police, the explosion occurred at 1455 HR's right next to a photo booth located under one of the various staircases leading to the shopping plaza. The photo booth and an adjacent photocopier were destroyed. In addition, several shop windows of the surrounding shops and the kiosk were broken. The damage is estimated at around 300,000 Swiss francs. Fortunately, the explosion only caused a few minor injuries, which could be released after outpatient treatment at the airport's medical center. There was no panic, assured a passerby. The only scream I heard was from a small child. By the evening, traffic in the station concourse had returned to normal. Only a large area near the explosion site was cordoned off. The initial forensics did not yet reveal the type of explosive device that had been detonated. Press spokesman Ulrich Krebs of the Federal Department of Justice and Police FDJP explained that the Office of the Attorney General of Switzerland, which is responsible for explosives offenses, initiated a judicial police investigation. Late on Monday afternoon, a man claimed responsibility for the attack in a call to the French news agency AFP in Geneva on behalf of the organization 9th June. The agency thought it recognized the voice of the unknown man who had already claimed responsibility for the attack on the Federal Palace on Sunday TA of Monday. According to Ulrich Krebs, the investigations into this incident had not yielded any new findings by Monday evening.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Tuesday, 21st July 1981.
Blick found the nest of bomb sweepers BYP-A, Grönicher from Beirut.
In a dingy office hung with propaganda material in the Palestinian part of Beirut, Blick has discovered the bosses of the terrorists who are waging a bomb war against Switzerland. These fanatics are grimly determined to free the Armenian imprisoned in Geneva for the murder of a Turkish diplomat. As long as the Swiss government does not meet our demands, the actions will continue, Murad Armenian said. Murad is one of the 3 masked underground fighters Blick spoke to. Their organization calls itself the Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia, Asala. Asala wants to avenge the Turkish atrocities against the Armenian people. It fights for the establishment of an independent Armenian state in eastern Turkey. It wages war on everything that, in its opinion, collaborates with the Turks, also Switzerland. The freedom fighter arrested in Geneva on the 9th of June this year is not a murderer, the Asala people declare. The tough guys admit to having called on all Armenian revolutionaries to take action against Switzerland. Nevertheless, officially they do not want to take responsibility for the mysterious 9th of June organization, which identified itself as the author of the bombs of Bern, Kloten, Lausanne, and Geneva. Asala controls its actions from a corner of the world where even Interpol has to stretch its arms. Beirut is teeming with heavily armed men who often do not know themselves who is friend or foe. It is a city where tanks unexpectedly drive up at street crossings, anti-aircraft guns are brought into position, and 15-year-olds check passers-by identity cards with their rifles ready to fire.
Blick, Zurich, Friday, 31st July 1981.
25 injured. Armenian organization confesses again third bomb, this time in Lausanne.
Lausanne, Bern, 21st July. DDP-SDA. For the third time in 3 days, a bomb attack has been carried out in Switzerland. After the Federal Palace in Bem and Cloten Airport, it was the turn of a department store in Lausanne city center on Tuesday afternoon. Shortly before 4 HRs, an explosive device went off in the ladies' clothing department of Neue Warenhaus AG EPA Show UNIP. 25 persons were injured, some seriously. The Armenian Underground Movement Organization 9th of June claimed responsibility for the crime in an anonymous telephone call. The explosion occurred on the ground floor of the department stores. According to the police, 20 of the 25 persons injured had to be taken to hospital. Some of them were later released. Some persons suffered severe burns to their legs. The injuries were mainly caused by splinters. The explosive device detonated in Lausanne was said to be very similar to the bomb used in Monday's attack at Zurich-Cloten Airport. Under certain circumstances, this explosive device can be as small as a box of matches, since it had been hidden under a clothes rack. The impact had been somewhat muffled. At the time of the explosion, many human beings had been in the department stores. As further explosions had been threatened, the department stores was evacuated. Shortly after 18 HIRs, the French news agency AFP received an anonymous call. The caller was apparently the same man who had already taken responsibility after the attacks in Bem and in Zurich-Cloten. The Lausanne police received tips about a person who was said to be a suspect in connection with the attack in the department stores. A manhunt was immediately launched. According to Ulrich Krebs, spokesman for the FDJP, all possible security measures were initiated by the authorities. The on-call group of the Scientific Service of the Zurich City and Cantonal Police immediately traveled to Lausanne on Tuesday evening to assist in the investigation. The officers are explosives experts. In Armenian circles in Switzerland, the bombings attributed to the organization 9th June have caused consternation and indignation. Persons close to the Paris-based Committee for the Defense of Armenian Concerns also condemn the attacks and consider them counterproductive. Doubts are even being expressed about Armenian authorship.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Wednesday, 22nd July 1980.
Armenian attacks against Switzerland.
Armenian organizations have carried out a series of attacks against Switzerland and Swiss institutions in recent years. 28 May 1976. The Turkish consulate and a Turkish bank in Zurich are devastated by bombs. 6 December 1978. A bomb package explodes in the Turkish consulate in Geneva. There is extensive damage to property. The new Armenian resistance identifies itself as the perpetrator. 22nd August 1979. An explosive device is thrown on a pedestrian walkway in Geneva. It is intended for a Turkish diplomat, but injures 2 Swiss nationals. The Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia claims responsibility. 6th February 1980. An unknown person shoots at the car of the Turkish ambassador in Bem. The ambassador is slightly injured. 18th February 1980. Explosion at the Swissair offices in Rome. 3rd October 1980. A homemade bomb explodes in the hotel room of a young Armenian man and woman in Geneva. The man is seriously injured. 8th-9th October 1980. The Swiss Embassy and the Swiss Tourist Office in Beirut are damaged by a bomb from the 3rd October organization. 12th October 1980. A bomb explodes in the Swiss Transport Office and in the Swissair branch in Paris. Further attacks on Swiss transport offices abroad follow on 13th of October 1980 in London, on 10th November 1980 in Rome, on 27th of January 1981 again in Rome. 4th February 1981. A bomb is discovered at the Swiss consulate in Los Angeles. 9th of June 1981. An employee of the Turkish consulate in Geneva is killed in the middle of the street by a Lebanese of Armenian origin. The Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia claims responsibility for the crime. The assassin is remanded in custody in Geneva. 28th of June 1981. Attack by the 9th June organization against the Swissair offices in Tehran. 20th of July 1981. A bomb explodes in a rubbish bin at the Federal Palace in Bern. SDA.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Tuesday, 21st July 1980.
Bomb terror in Geneva Central Station, injured.
Geneva Cornavin, 22nd July. SDAAP bombs number 4 and 5 exploded at Geneva's main Cornavin railway station about an hour apart late on Wednesday afternoon. The explosive devices were placed in luggage lockers in a subway from Place Montbriand and Place Cornavin under tracks 2 and 3. A 22-year-old man was critically injured, a 17-year-old girl was seriously injured, and 3 other persons were slightly injured. As in the 3 previous attacks, the Armenian underground organization 9th of June again claimed responsibility for the attacks to the French news agency AFP. The first bomb went off at 17:26. An hour later, at 18:35 HRs, there was a second explosion which, however, did not cause any further injuries. It was not yet clear on Wednesday evening whether the second detonation was due to another explosive device or the explosion of explosive luggage. The detonation pressure ripped away several doors, and an ensuing fire damaged the baggage locking system as well as some telephone booths. As is usual with explosives offenses, the Office of the Attorney General of Switzerland in Bern also became involved in the investigation in this case. The area around the station was cordoned off after the first detonation. Several ambulances immediately drove to the station. A man born in 1959 had been critically injured. On Wednesday evening, they were fighting for his life. His sister, born in 1964, suffered burns all over her body and was hit by several splinters. Another girl of the same age also suffered burns and broke a leg. These 3 persons were busy opening one of the lockers at the moment of the explosion. Furthermore, an American born in 1960 was injured by splinters to the chest, and a Japanese born in 1934 was stunned by the detonation blast. As late as Wednesday morning, the entire Geneva train station had been meticulously searched following an anonymous call. However, as was learned at the press conference of the Geneva authorities on Wednesday evening, nothing suspicious could be found. It is therefore assumed that the detonated explosive devices were deposited in the lockers after the search.
The 9th of June wants to continue the terror.
As late as Wednesday, the 9th June organization had threatened to continue its attacks against Swiss institutions until the Armenian Martyros Jamkodijan, who had been arrested in Geneva on 9th of June and shot a Turk in the street, was released. A corresponding Beirut agency report was broadcast by Ticino Radio. Jamkodijan had been taken to an isolated cell and beaten with feet and guns by Swiss police, who were described as a gang of imperialism. Switzerland is the most sophisticated white weapon in the hands of imperialism and is no longer neutral, the message of the 9th June organization also says. In the federal parliament on Wednesday, it was stressed that the Federal Council had repeatedly refused to bow to blackmail threats. The series of bombs began on Sunday with an attack in front of the federal palace. There was only very minor damage to property. On Monday, an explosive device exploded at the Zurich-Kloten Airport railway station. 5 persons were slightly injured, and property damage of around 300,000 francs was caused. On Tuesday, several persons were injured, some seriously, when an explosive device went off in a Lausanne department stores. The Armenian underground organization 9th of June has claimed responsibility for all these attacks. In the meantime, the investigations continued at full speed without any success in the manhunt by Wednesday evening.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Thursday, 23 Juli 1980.
Then Switzerland can expect a great deal. And I would like to say, however, that the entire population, and above all the government, are the ones who bear the greatest guilt if these things actually arrive. The indifference of the Swiss population and of the government makes such things possible, but so do the false legislation and the false humanitarianism.
That is absolutely correct. But this applies not only to Switzerland, but also to all countries of the earth where such occurrences can go into effect.
These things, however, are well known not only to us, but also to every thinking earth human who deals with the real facts.
That is clear. Nevertheless, these ones still do not want to recognize the truth.
That corresponds to the truth, but now let me mention those important things that will report themselves as world-moving in the future. These coming events are already known to you in some cases, but in certain parts, also only in a few details. Concerning Iran, the end of Khomeini is well known to you, which begins to be at hand with the fall of Bani Sadr.
Parliamentary candidate assassinated in Iran.
Beirut, 23 July. APDDP, a day before presidential elections scheduled for Friday. The domestic political scene in Iran continues to be overshadowed by assassinations of government supporters and executions of opponents of the mullah's regime. On Thursday, according to a report by Radio Tehran, Islamic cleric Saeed Hassan Beheshti and his nephew were assassinated in Isfahan. The 36-year-old Beheshti, a cousin of Ayatollah Mohammad Hussein Beheshti, the leader of the Islamic Republican Party CRP, who was killed in an explosive attack at Tehran party headquarters in late June, was an IRP candidate for the parliamentary by-elections. Bani Sadr calls for election boycott London, 23 July, Reuters. Ousted Iranian President Abolhassan Bani Sadr has called for an election boycott on the eve of Iran's presidential election. The appeal, published on leaflets in London and elsewhere on Thursday, said the clergy-led regime had no other prospect than civil war.
Neue Zürcher. Zeitung Zürich, Thursday, 23 July 1981.
Iran faces civil war.
Tehran. Open fighting in the middle of the Iranian capital. Several dead and at least 40 injured were the result of clashes between Revolutionary Guards and members of the opposition People's Mujahideen yesterday. The Khomeini henchmen fired ruthlessly into a mass demonstration. The crowd protested, "It is the month of blood, of the fall of Khomeini."
Blick, Zurich, Friday, 31st July 1981.
Iran, 38 executions.
Tehran, 7th Aug AFP, 38 opposition figures were executed in Tehran on Friday in the biggest wave of executions since the ouster of President Bani Sadr a month and a half ago. A report by the official Pars news agency said the 38 counter-revolutionaries, had been arrested in several conspiratorial shelters. They allegedly threw grenades and Molotov cocktails and murdered innocent people. In total, 370 opponents of the mullah dictatorship have been summarily shot since Bani Sadr's ouster.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Saturday, 8th August 1989.
Iran, strike against the People's Mujahideen.
London, 20th August, Reuters AP. Iranian security forces launched a major new operation against leftist opposition figures on Thursday. A state radio report received in London said, Revolutionary Guards stormed a People's Mujahideen base in the morning. It was one of the most important command centers for coordinating terrorist and sabotage operations. According to the radio station, several guerrillas were arrested. The Iranian revolutionary regime on Wednesday again demanded that France extradite the Persian regime. Opponents who took control of a speedboat destined for Tehran but abandoned their piracy enterprise on Wednesday in the French naval port of Toulon Friday's TA. A Tehran Foreign Ministry statement said, although the end of this conspiracy is logically a victory for the Islamic Revolution, the government of Iran will not back down from its demand for the arrest and extradition of these pirates, just as it continues to insist on the arrest and extradition of criminals such as impeached President Bani Sadr and Rajavi, the leader of the People's Mujahideen allied with Bani Sadr.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Friday, 21st August 1989.
The arising bomb assassination attempts, which I already explained to you and which will cause many close friends of the insane dictator to depart from this life, will actually constitute only the beginning of the irrevocable downfall. After the first attack in Tehran, in which the blood judge of Persia and many governing bodies will find death, there will soon follow a second, in which the lives of the president and one of his ministers will be taken away.
Iran, bomb kills politician.
30th August. A bomb attack on the seat of government of the Iranian Prime Minister kills 7 human beings, among them also President Mohammad Ali Rajahi and Prime Minister Mohammad Jawad Bahonar. The government in Tehran declares that the fifth column of the USA and the Iranian President Abul Hassan Banisadr, who was overthrown in June 1981, are responsible for the attack. After internal political disputes between the ruling Islamic Republican Party IRP and the left-wing opposition, Rajai had only taken over as president on 24th of July 1981 as successor to the deposed Bani Sadr, 21. 6. P. 101. This enabled the Islamic fundamentalists of the IRP to further expand their position of power in Iran. On 2 September 1981, Mohammad Reza Madawi Khani became the new prime minister, and Sayyid Ali Khamenei became president. However, Prime Minister Khani is replaced as head of government on 29 October 1981 by Mir Hossein Mousavi Khamenei, a hardline supporter of the conservative fundamentalist direction within the IRP. The bombing in Tehran is already the second major attack against important representatives of the IRP this year.
Chronik 1921, Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, Sunday, 30th August 1901.
Khomeini gathers his last followers around him.
Tehran, Iran's aged revolutionary leader Ayatollah Khomeini, 82, fears further assassinations against his dictatorial rule. The next target could be the parliament, Khomeini warned in a radio address yesterday. At the same time, he called on those in charge to only use security forces that can be trusted absolutely. Although the number of people he trusts is dwindling, Khomeini is also convinced that he can stay in power with his ultra-conservative Muslim leaders. Even the assassination of presidents will not stop our revolution, he declared to his new government earlier this week. The Sunday before last, a bomb attack on the seat of government in Tehran killed President Mohammad Ali Rajai, 48, and Prime Minister Javad Bahonar, 47. It was the heaviest blow to the rule of the religious mullahs since the 28th of June. At that time, 74 leading politicians were killed in an explosion at the headquarters of the ruling Islamic Republican Party. Among them was the notorious blood judge Ayatollah Beheshti, who had been earmarked as Khomeini's successor. Since the ousting of former President and Army Commander-in-Chief Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, who has since fled to France in a hijacked military plane, senior representatives of the regime and Khomeini's confidants have been repeatedly killed by opposition underground fighters.
Blick Zürich, Wednesday, 9th September, 1981.
Ah, I have calculated once before that this man will be called President Ratsaj or something similar. Is that right?
Your calculation was inaccurate, though not completely. Anyhow, he will find death through another bomb attack. The political forms will change again through this, and new mass executions will reveal Persia's bloody way that will be dictated by the insane dictator Khomeini. The ensuing mass executions in Iran will no longer move into the first part of 1,000. Rather, they will move into the thousands, and children will no longer be spared, but will be shot on the open roads by the captors, who call themselves Revolutionary Guards.
Death sentences, blood toll of the revolution.
20th September. In Iran, 198 human beings are executed after the recent demonstrations by opposition members. 3 days later, students are murdered for the first time for political agitation in schools. Executions in Iran have continued to increase since the ouster of Iranian President Abul Hassan Bani Sadr on the 21st of June 1981. Above all, members of the oppositional left-wing Mujahideen-e-Chalk are sentenced to death. A large proportion of those executed are executed without charge or trial, or directly after summary trials, usually without rights of defense or the possibility of appeal. The cause of the sharp increase in executions in Iran is the growing domestic power struggle between the ruling Islamic Republican Party IRP and its opponents, especially the Mujahideen-e-Chalk, 21.6, PT 101, which mobilizes to fight the Iranian terror regime. At the end of the year, the international prisoner aid organization Amnesty International AI, which is actively engaged worldwide against human rights violations, the death penalty and torture of nonviolent political prisoners, announces that the number of those executed in Iran in 1981 is 2,619, 2,444 of them alone since Bani Sadr was deposed. Among those murdered are ministers and government officials, as well as numerous artists, women and children.
Chronik 1980. Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, Sunday, 20th September, 1980.
But this, in turn, will mean that already at this time, an underlying civil and fratricidal war will be broken out, which will find its origin and stirring up with Bani Sadr, who will call into being a resistance movement in France against Khomeini.
Crazy, because Bani Sadr, as you said, is designated by Khomeini himself as an ally, and with this, has also been in exile in France for the past few years.
That is correct, only this time, Bani Sadr will no longer be for Khomeini, but against him, whereby he will initiate everything in order to have him be murdered.
Then this should probably be the third assassination attempt?
Your question confuses me?
I mean that first, an assassination attempt on President Reagan will be carried out. Then, after that, there will be another on the Pope, after which then the third attempt should follow in the course of only a few months, if I am properly oriented.
You confuse the facts, because Khomeini's death does not take place in the period mentioned, as you know, because this event will only happen later.
Sorry, of course, I have confused things. But on whom is the third assassination attempt committed then?
I would have just said this if you had not interrupted me.
That was not my intention.
This assassination attempt will be committed on the President of Egypt during a military parade if the conditions for it do not change. Sadat will be attacked and even killed on Tuesday, the 6th of October, 1981, on the VIP platform of the Cairo military square of Abbasiyya by members of the army itself.
President Sadat assassinated attack during a parade of troops.
Cairo, 6th October DPA Reuter, Egyptian President Anwar as-Sadat was assassinated on Tuesday in an attack by members of an artillery unit. According to the presidential office, he died in a hospital a few hours after the assassination attempt. During a parade of troops marking the 8th anniversary of the 1973 Egyptian-Israeli War, several soldiers attacked the VIP box with hand grenades and machine guns, according to eyewitnesses.
Mubarak nominated as new president.
Cairo, 6th October DDP, Egypt's ruling National Democratic Party on Tuesday evening nominated Vice President Hosni Mubarak as its candidate for the election of the head of state, which must be held within the next 20 days. The Egyptian news agency MENA reported that the party's recently created Politburo unanimously passed a resolution to this effect.
Address by the Vice President.
Cairo, 6th October SDA AAFP, President Sadat, the hero of war and peace, died a martyr on Tuesday. With these words, Vice President Hosni Mubarak announced the death of the Egyptian leader in the evening. In a televised address to the people, Mubarak highlighted Sadat's work for peace in the region. He expressed his conviction that the Egyptian people would follow the footsteps of Rais. Egypt would continue its quest for peace and honor all international treaties, so also the peace treaty with Israel, which Sadat had concluded. In accordance with the constitutional provisions, the Speaker of Parliament, Sufi Abu Taleb, will continue as head of state after Sadat's death, Mubarak also announced. As his first official act, Abu Taleb confirmed the vice president in his post. The elections to determine the new Egyptian head of state will be held within 60 days, as corresponds to the constitution, Mubarak further announced. This period corresponds to the Egyptian constitution.
State of emergency declared.
A state of emergency was declared throughout Egypt on Tuesday. This decision was made in the evening hours by the country's interim head of state, Sufi Abu Taleb. The duration of the state of emergency, which was imposed because of the death of President Sadat, is initially set at 1 year.
Satisfaction in Libya.
A report by the Libyan news agency Jana said Sadat had fallen victim to a revolutionary blow.
Neue Zürcher Zeitung, Zürich, Wednesday, 7th October, 1980.
President Sadat assassinated during military parade.
Cairo, 6th October, AP DDP BU. Egypt's President Anwar as-Sadat was killed in an assassination attempt on Tuesday. Vice President Hosni Mubarak told Egyptian radio on Tuesday evening that Sadat succumbed to serious injuries, received when several uniformed men fired and lobbed hand grenades at the VIP stand during a military parade in Cairo to commemorate Egypt's victories in the last war against Israel in 1973. During the parade, several uniformed men had suddenly jumped out of a jeep and fired shots from rapid-fire rifles at the VIP stand where Sadat was standing along with government members, Islamic and Christian clerics, and foreign diplomats. During his speech, which was broadcast 7 hours after the attack, Mubarak announced the imposition of a state of emergency for 1 year. He said that the foreign and domestic policies pursued by the assassinated president, who had died a martyr, would continue. The Cairo leadership would continue on the path of reconciliation with Israel and generally follow the ideals of the deceased. As Mubarak announced, Sadat's successor is to be elected within 60 days. Until then, the President of the People's Assembly will take over. Sufi Abu Taleb will take over the presidential duties. As his first official act, he confirmed Mubarak in office and at the same time appointed him commander-in-chief of the country's armed forces. Mubarak himself was nominated as the first candidate for the election of the head of state by the recently created Politburo of the ruling National Democratic Party later that evening. This decision was taken unanimously, the Egyptian news agency MENA reported. On Wednesday, Parliament is expected to follow this recommendation. Mubarak is considered a sure successor to Sadat.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Wednesday, 7th October 1981.
There will be 10 to 12 deaths as a result of the attack to lament over. In addition, some assassins will die by the defense forces. Several diplomats and a church dignitary, who will likewise be on the very unsatisfactorily secured VIP platform, will not escape the attack and will be affected. The attack will be implemented by Egyptian soldiers who are members of the Army for the Freedom of Egypt movement and the Muslim Brotherhood, who will also stand in the pay of the Libyan and mad ruler Gaddafi. The actual origin of all of this, however, comes from Begin. The mighty one of Israel, Menachem Begin, will be the actual manipulator behind the assassination of Sadat, who will believe unto death that the powerful and insidious murderer is actually a good friend, but Begin truly is not such.
The Egyptian president was considered a guarantor for the peace process. In Israel, there is dismay over Sadat's death, by our correspondent Manfred Schroeder.
Tel Aviv, 6th Oct. The political establishment and public opinion in Israel reacted with dismay to the death of President Anwar as-Sadat. Despite the Israeli-Egyptian differences of opinion on the Palestinian question, Sadat was considered a guarantor for the continuation of the previous peace process, which began with his visit to Jerusalem in November 1977 and led to the conclusion of a peace treaty in 1979. However, the assassination also gives a boost to those extremist circles who want to prevent the last-minute evacuation of the Sinai Peninsula, which is due to take place in April. According to these circles, Israel must secure a strategic apron in the Sinai Peninsula for security reasons and at least keep the two military airfields beyond the borders, as well as the settlements in the Rafah sector in North Sinai. The leader of the radical right-wing Tehiyah party, Professor Yuval Ne'eman, said after Sadat's assassination that the incident showed how unstable the situation in the neighboring country really was and how unreliable the peace agreement concluded at Camp David therefore was. The press spokesman of Prime Minister Menachem Begin, Uri Ben-Porat, however, spoke of a shock for the Israeli government. Prominent Palestinians, such as the former Jordanian Defense Minister Nusiba, said that although they were against Sadat's efforts to achieve autonomy for the occupied territories, they called the attack upsetting.
Sadat's